Aimed chiefly at weakening Australia's contribution to the United Nations action in Korea, rolling strikes in industry after industry were disrupting production throughout the country as we moved into 1949. Worst hit were the coal fields. This subversive and very active policy of the Communist Party was being intensified, centering in New South Wales. Mines were at a standstill, but at mass meetings on the fields, the insidious red propaganda was at peak production, feeding the thousands of unemployed. Silent Steelworks bore eloquent testimony to the grim situation. Mine owners' representative Davey presented this angle.
The proprietors were willing to make concessions by agreement, but insisted that increased or additional privileges should be bound to guarantees and not to vague promises of increased coal production. The mining unions insisted, however, that their log of claims should be accepted in its entirety. The colliery proprietors, who are supported in their stand that arbitration must prevail, will accept the referee's decision. The mining unions will not, and that is the deplorable fact why there is a coal strike today.
Prime Minister Chipley ordered the use of troops in the mines. Drastic action approved by Dr. Everett and welcomed by Labour Premier McGurr. The communist-led strike was broken in New South Wales and achieved in the face of bitter criticism voiced in parades and marches by the workless. Commonwealth and State Security Police swooped on Communist Party headquarters. Mark's house in Sydney was the scene of one of the biggest raids in which crates of pamphlets, documents, dossiers and files were seized. But hopes of obtaining top-secret data were not fulfilled, the bulk of the documents being of little value. Communist Party Chairman Sharkey, who had openly advocated that workers should support an invading Red Army if Australia were attacked, was sentenced to 3 years jail for sedition, but was jubilant after an appeal and served only 15 months. Highlight of this troublesome period was the resignation of Victorian Communist leader Cecil Sharpley, who denounced his comrades and their fraudulent practices in this exclusive interview with a newspaper editor.
Now, Mr. Sharpley, seeing that people can see as well as hear you, I repeat a question that I asked in a broadcast the other night. What is your motive in exposing and denouncing the people with whom you have worked for so many years?
I want to say emphatically and finally that my motive is to awaken this country to a real danger.
And you say that that danger is the Communist Party?
Quite definitely. And if you don't believe that communism is a real menace in this country, you are living in a fool's paradise. They are trying to sabotage everything that you've been struggling for years. They would destroy everything that is democratic, even to selling out of this country.
Turbulence in the industrial fields was accompanied in New South Wales by abnormal weather phases. Cyclonic winds and driving rains battered the coastal district. Record snowfalls mantled the Great Dividing Range, and roads were transformed into slippery death traps. Beaches and foreshores received a pounding with gales up to 80 miles per hour, causing untold damage and dislocating shipping. Inside the Heads, this former Dutch submarine, while being towed to safety, broke away with 4 men aboard, at the mercy of the roughest seas ever experienced inside Sydney Harbour. One man decided to swim for it. Watch him dive overboard. Suffering from exhaustion and exposure, he safely reached the shore. A real-life drama of the sea. During March 1949, the northern rivers of New South Wales were swelled by the statewide deluge, and once again the Hunter Valley was inundated. Maitland was awash. The countryside was transformed into an inland sea, a sea of muddy chocolate, indelibly marking high water on 1,000 walls. As on many previous occasions came Operation Cleanup, the inevitable aftermath of one of nature's demoralizing and destructive quirks. Happy to be home again, these people seem to accept the heartbreak of ruined furnishings and the loss of personal treasures. From the floor up, it's a big cleaning job, and this is how high the water reached in this house. The pavement is a temporary home for these women, but there's no melody and little life left in this piano.
Oh, well, I own a furniture shop in Maitland, and I've just about lost everything I've got, but I guess there's plenty of people worse off than I am.
Few succumb to these disastrous invasions, for there is in this district an indestructible spirit of survival. In South Australia, where nature had failed to provide sufficient water, Premier Thomas Playford opened the Loxton Irrigation Scheme, designed to water 9,000 acres of fertile land. This War Service land settlement project drew its water from the Murray River, electrically pumping 2,400,000 gallons an hour to the farms for cultivation of vegetables and citrus crops, and thereby celebrating another achievement in land settlement. For settlers from overseas, the first naturalization ceremony under the new Citizenship Act was staged in Canberra. Immigration Minister Caldwell introduces Prime Minister Ben Chifley. Mr. Justice Simpson of the Supreme Court presided as men of 7 nationalities took the oath of allegiance and received their citizenship certificates.
I, in your name,
I, Jan Jandura Pucek,
renounce my Czechoslovakian nationality
renounce my Czechoslovak nationality.
An historic ceremony in the federal capital as new Australians became true Australians. But for the new Australians aboard the motor ship Multan, it was not a happy day. The ship was the centre of a smallpox scare when she arrived in Sydney. Passengers were transferred to the quarantine station at North Head. The station had not been opened since 1938. An extensive array of buildings making it Sydney's most exclusive hotel with all mod cons and harbour views. Every passenger took a bath and their luggage was fumigated. Inconvenient perhaps, but a sound precaution to safeguard the nation against dreaded infectious diseases. But there was another problem which was causing the gravest concern, not only to the government but to every man on the land. Rabbits, in plague proportions never before experienced, nibbling through the core of the nation's economy. Netting for fences was scarce, and they roamed and multiplied at random. Drives were organized, such as this at Korang in Victoria, where the panic-stricken hordes were destroyed by the thousands. This fox was among those cornered, but the wily marauder quickly realized the danger and took off. The hunters weren't worried. They were interested only in eliminating the pests and preserving the pastures for sheep. This, then, was 1949. Mr. Alf Bernard, a Melbourne magician, applies his art to expose a famous old racket, the thimble and pea trick, used long before 1949. There's one born every minute, so watch from under this glass tabletop as his fingers manipulate the elusive pea. You have to be strong to resist the trickster, but even stronger to match the prowess of this sideshow man, young Apollo, who substituted rocks and sledgehammers for sticks and stones to prove his bones couldn't be broken. Unless, of course, if his attacker was a bit off target. And how's this for a muscular mouthful of mighty molars? Fresh from her London Olympic triumphs, Dutch track and field star Mrs. Fanny Blankers-Koen showed her amazing versatility to Australian athletic fans, first by hurling a discus and then in the 100-yard sprint. In the field was an old Olympic rival, Shirley Strickland, and an up-and-coming 17-year-old from Lithgow, Marjorie Jackson. But the visitor broke down, and the Lithgow Flash, outpacing Strickland, was on her way along the road which led to Olympic honours, gold medals and world records. $99,800 people paid to enter Flemington Racecourse in November to see the Melbourne Cup. Delta, winner of the Victorian Derby, was a 6-1 favourite. The total Isata staff was never busier. A record £74,790 was invested on the Cup field. But it was not Delta's day. A 4-year-old bay, Fox Army, starting at 16-1, outstayed Hoyle and Benvolo to earn the £300 Gold Cup for owner Lance Robinson and land more than £20,000 in bets. It was 31-year-old Sydney jockey Billy Fellows' 151st win in 1,447 races, but his first ride in the Cup. The Australian Jockey Club was cracking down on doping, and swabbing for all winners was introduced. A £20,000 laboratory was equipped at Randwick for the testing of saliva samples for go-slow or go-fast drugs. By the end of the year, from 1,200 swabs, 25 proved positive. Evidence which cut short the turf careers of a number of racing men. Evidence provided by a woman, Jean Kimball, world's first female swabbist. "11-year-old Billy Jennings of Chelmer near Brisbane refused to allow a paralysed right leg to interfere with his cricket. But fieldsmen were scarce, so Billy called on his canine friends for help. Fido's at point. But he's a collie, not a pointer. Billy trained the dogs himself, so he couldn't complain when they cut off his boundaries. Behind the stumps, Bessie showed the talent of a Talon. Who said a dog's life wasn't fun, even if it was spent foxing? At White City, the school tennis championships were in full swing. Young players came from all parts of the state, not only to seek a title, but also to receive expert tuition from the stars of the day and of yesteryear. J.O. Anderson was one of the tutors. And recognize that little chap's backhand? Yes, that's Ken Rosewall on the first rung of the ladder to fame. Already at the top of the ladder were Victor Barner at left and Richard Bergman, between them world champion 19 times. And there was lots of clapping when petrol rationing was declared invalid. Restrictions were lifted and coupons thrown away. Rationing was introduced in 1940 and intensified when Japan entered the war. And now, 9 years later, petrol tanks were filled legitimately and accelerators were pressed flat to the boards. On the road that year, death came swiftly to 4 women and 33 other passengers were injured when a Sydney double-decker bus crashed through a safety fence near the Spit Bridge. The first fatalities in a bus smash for 17 years. The driver claimed his wheels had locked. Ambulances ran the shuttle service to Manly and North Sydney hospitals. Some victims were trapped for more than an hour. 5 months later, City Coroner Rasky cleared the driver of blame and found that the 4 women had died accidentally. Rescue work by the police was highly commended. No individual had brought greater credit to the New South Wales Police Force than Sergeant Harry Ware, founder of the Cliff Rescue Squad, here seen on a training session at Echo Point, Katoomba. As a rigger, he'd helped build the Sydney Harbour Bridge before joining the police force. He was nicknamed the Rock Spider by his devoted and admiring squad. Often he met hazards at the end of 300 feet of rope, sometimes to save a life, sometimes to recover a body. No task was too difficult nor too dangerous for this nerveless founder of the now world-famous Police Cliff Rescue Squad. But these French beauties were in no distress. They simply brought a breath of Paris to Sydney for the first time, and a range of the latest continental fashions. Their appearance on parade aroused great interest among the male and female audience, from slightly different viewpoints, of course. From the other side of the English Channel came the famous London milliner Hugh Beresford, designer of hats for the royal family, to present his latest creations to the fashion-conscious ladies of Melbourne. Also on parade was Beryl James, Miss Australia 1949. One of the most popular and successful to represent her country in this annual contest.
And now it's time to say goodbye, to say thank you to all those thousands of Australians who have been so kind to me. I want you all to know that I shall do my very best to be a worthy representative of my country.
Famous bass singer, New Zealand-born Oscar Natsker arrived to entertain us on a low note.
Welcome to Australia, Mr. Natsker. Hope you had a good trip over?
No, I didn't. I had a very bumpy trip, matter of fact. I'm jolly glad to be here.
A reporter then asked him to produce his lowest note.
Well, after crossing the Tasman today, I think I can get down to a low C. D-R-I-N-K-I-N-G. Low enough?
The Sydney Art Gallery was the centre of a big art controversy when William Dobell was awarded the Archibald Prize for his portrait of Brisbane painter Margaret Olley. Gallery director Hal Missingham talked it over with Dobell.
Well, there seems to have been just a little controversy about this painting. You'd like to say a few words about it?
I just can't understand the controversy myself. I try to make a decorative picture of it. To me, the picture is the main thing, and the likeness, of course, is very essential. And I think I got the likeness, and I hope I made quite a nice picture of it.
I think it's like it, too.
Here's Margaret Olley in person, and this is how Dobell saw her in oils. Woomera Rocket Range, 270 miles northwest of Adelaide, extending 1,200 miles up through the uninhabited Gibber country, becomes a proving ground for the products of the newly constructed long-range weapons establishment. This was 1949. Our rockets were small, but even at this early stage, some cost £10,000 for a flying career which might last only a few seconds. Australia, backed by the United Kingdom and America, was playing her part in research and development of guided missiles. By the end of the year, 705 rockets had been fired from this remote outpost. The emphasis was on defense, but owing to the lack of manpower, cruisers Shropshire and Hobart were laid up, and the heavy task of maneuvers fell upon men aboard these tribal-class destroyers. Greyhounds of the sea, whose task it was to attack battleships and submarines with equal dash. Our latest acquisition to the Navy, aircraft carrier HMAS Sydney, warms up her striking force of Sea Furies and Fireflies. And among the pilots were many young Englishmen, here to assist in the training of Australian crews. Aircraft lead the carrier for a mock attack on the combined New Zealand and Australian fleets. Meanwhile, aboard HMAS Australia, Captain Burrell, who was later to become Chief of the Naval Staff, directed anti-aircraft fire against the enemy. Then it was back to the deck after a successful sortie for pilots and planes of Australia's 1st Fleet Air Arm. In another part of the Pacific, Manus Island, recaptured from the Japanese in 1944 and converted into a major American base, a vast storehouse for the offensive against Japan. In 1949, America wanted to continue the partnership, but the Australian government turned them down. The equipment enough to support 150,000 men was offered for £10 million. This was also rejected. A colossal waste, left to the elements and vandals, and finally to the creeping jungle of Manus Island. In the western highlands of New Guinea, however, there was no lack of activity when a conference convened by Administrator Murray and attended by Sydney industrialist and philanthropist Sir Edward Holstrom discussed the possibility of sheep farming. The Romney Marsh breed was selected, and Sir Edward established a trust fund to finance the experiment. Author Frank Clune and artist William Dobell went along to record the scene in words and drawings, and to do a bit of makeup work. A cameraman focused attention on his false teeth. Great columns of natives from the Wagi and Chimbu valleys converged on the Nondogal airstrip to greet the big Balus, as they called the aircraft bringing Australia's Governor-General, the Honourable Sir William McKell. It was a dramatic moment as the wild tribesmen surged around the plane and visitors, eagerly looking for #1 Big White Master. The tribesmen vied with their chiefs in an overwhelming expression of friendship. Microphones held no terrors for the Luluwai chief as he welcomes the vice-regal party in a typical Highland chant.
Thank you very, very much.
His Excellency meets chieftains of the various tribes, resplendent with birds of paradise plumes and ceremonial spears. Of the 10,000 present that day, many had walked more than 100 miles to participate in this historical gathering, and no royal representative ever had a more colourful or enthusiastic welcome. But in 1949, many areas of central New Guinea were still unexplored, a mysterious, unknown backcountry. The war years had been a setback to the Australian administration, but despite the lack of experienced patrol officers, they were determined to speed up their exploration program. This expedition was headed for the Jimmy River, a valley hitherto not trodden by Europeans, and trails that these primitive people had travelled for centuries in their quest for salt and pearl shell. The highest point crossed by the patrol, 10,500 feet. The Jimmy Valley lies below, but an arduous descent is negotiated before the river is reached, where a Kunda vine bridge spans the waterway. The bridge is an astonishing piece of engineering by primitive peoples. With bows and arrows, the Jimmy tribe gather excitedly on the other side of the river. Tense moments for the expedition, waiting for the next move. First, the chief approaches. And then follows his tribe, for the patrol's movements and gestures had obvious signs of friendship. Leader of the expedition, Nep Blood, examines curios brought in by the local natives. Relics of a bygone age of which the local people have no knowledge. These curios and Semitic features give credence to a theory that one of the lost tribes of Israel once inhabited the highlands. Proud and dignified, each one a cameo in a fascinating camera record of one of the world's last strongholds of primeval man. In 1949, a year to remember.